Good morning, warriors. Today is Monday, June 1st, 2026. Welcome to Morning Adrenaline. It is time to wake up the warrior. Hey, listen, today I'm going to hit a topic that I know is going to relate to a lot of people. And it might just be one of the toughest mental battles you're ever going to face in your life. Because if you're not going through it right now, you've probably already gone through it before. And if you haven't yet, in all likelihood, at some point in your life, maybe even multiple times, you will. Have you ever dealt with betrayal? And I'm not talking about someone betraying you that you barely cared about. I'm talking about betrayal from someone that you trusted, someone that you let close to you, someone you thought was aligned with you. Today's episode is going to be a little longer than normal because I want to tell you a personal story. And honestly, compared to what some people go through, this situation really wasn't that big of a deal. I always say it was the least of the worst possible things that could have happened. But there's a lesson inside of this that became too important not to share. So stay with me. I was recently in a relationship with someone who on the surface checked every single box. And I mean every box. This was a woman of God, a woman who studied the Bible, a feminine woman who said she wanted masculine leadership. She was sweet, caring, intentional, emotionally aware. We had great chemistry, passion, romance, connection. We grew up in the same state. We had the same things in common with nutrition, health, fitness. I mean, seemed to be on the same page. And there was this feeling that this was growing into something meaningful. She told me she loved me, told me she was all in, told me she wasn't going anywhere. And even though I had this small voice in the back of my mind telling me something felt off, I chose to believe her. So for about 90 days, everything felt aligned. Then adversity hit her personally. And I mean real adversity, multiple things at once that pushed her into overwhelm. And to be fair, that part was real. But there was one major problem. There was really only one person positioned to help her navigate the situation. Her ex-boyfriend. Without my knowledge, she reached back out to him knowing that decision was probably the end for us. And the reality is he could offer her something I couldn't in that moment. Professional help tied directly to her situation. Help that would save her thousands of dollars during a time where she genuinely needed that assistance. And I understood that. I really did. But instead of communicating through adversity and staying aligned with me, she leaned back in toward him. And almost overnight, literally within hours, everything changed. She went from fully invested with me to emotionally pushing me out. Now, let me be clear. I'm not a victim. And once I fully possessed what happened, I never would have taken her back. What confident person actually would? And I think that's an important distinction to make before we go any further, because some people dealing with betrayal are battling confidence issues, self-worth issues, emotional dependency, attachment wounds, or maybe even a fear of loneliness. These are different battles. Today, we're specifically talking about your ego. Because if you really do a deep dive, honestly, I think most people eventually realize the hardest part usually isn't losing the person. It is the battle with your personal ego. You're dealing with rejection, disrespect, wounded pride, the feeling of not being the one that was chosen. That's what keeps people emotionally trapped. And after a lot of reflection, I realized something important. Her actions revealed everything I needed to know. It revealed a lack of loyalty, a complete lack of communication, a lack of emotional maturity, and ultimately, the bottom line was a lack of respect for me. Because mature people communicate through adversity. And once I accepted that reality, honestly, I also had to accept this. No amount of chemistry, attraction, faith, connection, or potential can compensate for broken trust and misalignment, I should say, under pressure. That realization actually hurt, but it also created clarity for me. And clarity creates peace much faster than emotional denial ever will. Now, of course, I'm not mentioning her by name because this isn't about embarrassing someone publicly. That's not the point here. The point is the actual lesson, because what I learned through the experience was incredibly important. And I think a lot of people need to hear it. Because adversity reveals people. Character is easy to fake when life is easy. Pressure exposes integrity. And what the situation ultimately revealed was who she really was when life stopped feeling comfortable. Don't miss that point. Fun is easy. Chemistry is easy. Romance is easy. Vacations are easy. But struggle reveals whether there's actually a future. And honestly, her adversity became my blessing, not because I'm rooting against her, because I'm not, but because self-protection matters too. Who knows how much more time I would have invested before discovering that side of her, how much more emotionally attached I would have become. The realization changed everything for me because eventually I realized this really wasn't about her anymore. It was just simply about my ego. See, I know the kind of man that I am. I know the work I've done on myself. I know how I lead. I know the standards that I live by. I'm built on character and integrity. But none of that in the moment mattered because she chose what he could do for her in that moment. And if you've ever experienced something like this, then you understand exactly what I'm talking about. The ego replaying that disrespect in your mind, the ego wanting to prove something, the ego struggling with rejection. And luckily, I became self-aware enough to realize the only thing still hurting was exactly that. It was just my ego. So I decided to do a deep dive into how to quiet the ego after betrayal. Because ego can destroy your peace if you let it. When your ego takes the wheel, there's no calmness, no humility, no clarity, and then ultimately there's no peace. Instead, it becomes emotional warfare, and it's absolutely draining. So that's what we're talking about today. Today's episode is called The War Between Ego and Peace. Today, we're talking about how to quiet the ego after betrayal, heartbreak, rejection, disappointment, and emotional pain. And I'm going to give you 7 emotional traps people fall into after betrayal and 7 ways to begin escaping those traps. Now, to be clear, I didn't personally experience every single one of these phases. This was just my deep dive in what I discovered. But the more I researched ego, attachment, healing, peace, and of course, identity, the more I realized how many people stay emotionally trapped because they never fully understand what's actually happening internally. And overcoming that requires strength, not pretending you're okay, not emotional suppression, real emotional discipline. So throughout this episode, I want you to honestly ask yourself, am I struggling with ego or am I struggling with confidence, self-worth, attachment, emotional dependency, or fear of being alone? Because these are 2 different battles. And if you misidentify the problem, you'll keep trying to solve the wrong thing. So let me be clear. If your deepest issue is confidence or self-worth, this episode probably won't fully solve that for you. That is completely different work. Today, we're specifically talking about the human ego, your ego after disappointment, after betrayal, after rejection, after disrespect, and how to quiet it before it reshapes your personal identity. Because when ego takes control, your peace disappears. And so the goal of today is simple: to help you reclaim conditional discipline or emotional discipline, clarity, self-control, and peace internally. And we're not talking about revenge, and it's not by proving yourself, but it's through identity reconstruction. So here's the question of the day. Can you honestly recognize when your ego has taken control? I'm not talking about your intuition, not your standards or your self-respect. I'm talking about your ego. Because the first step to overcoming ego is recognizing when it's the thing driving your thoughts, reactions, emotions, and your behavior. And that's harder than most people think because ego disguises itself well. Sometimes it sounds like, I just need closure. Sometimes I just want answers. Sometimes I just want them to understand what they lost. But underneath all of that, a lot of times it's wounded pride, wounded identity, and wounded validation. And until you become self-aware enough to identify when ego has entered the conversation, you'll keep feeding emotional patterns that quietly destroy your peace. So let's get into this, because today is not about becoming emotionally numb, and it's not about pretending betrayal doesn't hurt, because it does. Today is about mastering yourself after the pain, Because if you don't intentionally process betrayal the right way, your ego will slowly reshape your identity. You may become colder, more cynical, emotionally guarded, disconnected from peace. And the scary part is you'll call that strength, but it's not. It's unresolved emotional warfare. So today, I want to walk you through 7 emotional traps people fall into after betrayal. And more importantly, how to begin escaping them through clarity, discipline, identity, and giving yourself peace. So let's get into point number 1. The first point is stop defending what their actions actually revealed. One of the biggest traps people fall into after betrayal is trying to emotionally defend the person who hurt them. You start explaining their betrayal away. Well, they were overwhelmed. They were struggling. Maybe they didn't mean it. Maybe the circumstances pushed them into it. And look, sometimes the circumstances are real. In my situation, they absolutely were. But eventually, you have to stop confusing understanding someone with excusing someone. Because at the end of the day, actions reveal alignment more than words ever will. And this is where ego quietly enters the conversation, because ego wants to protect the fantasy that they're still the person you hoped they were. The connection was deeper than it actually was. The relationship can still be saved, or that somehow the ending doesn't reflect reality. But reality does matter, and mature healing requires honesty, not emotional bargaining with yourself, because some people belong in your life and some people simply don't deserve continued access to you. That doesn't mean you hate them. It doesn't mean you attack them. It just means you finally accept that their actions revealed who they are. And that's when you get peace. And here's the action item for this section. Stop analyzing their words and start evaluating their patterns, because patterns reveal character. Promises don't, chemistry doesn't, attraction doesn't, nor does potential. Patterns do. So if someone repeatedly shows inconsistency, lack of communication, avoidance, disrespectful behavior, emotional instability, or disloyalty, believe the pattern, not the fantasy. Now, I know some of you are listening to this thinking, yeah, easier said than done. And you're actually right. It is, which is why I need you to stick with me all the way to point number 7 today, because later in this episode, I'm going to show you why action becomes extremely difficult when your identity is weak, wounded, emotionally dependent, or even unstable. See, most people try to change the behavior first, but behavior without identity rarely lasts. So for now, I just need you to become aware of the pattern. Awareness is the first step to peace. Here's point number 2. Stop turning the breakup into a courtroom. One of the most exhausting things ego does after betrayal is it puts you in constant mental litigation. You keep replaying the case in your head. Here's why they were wrong. Here's why you deserved better. Here's why they'll regret losing you. Here's why the other person isn't better than you. Here's why you were the better option. And look, maybe some of these things are true, and they probably are. But here's the problem. Every time you mentally reopen the case, you emotionally reconnect yourself to the pain. That's what your ego does. It keeps trying to win a battle that's already over. And meanwhile, your peace keeps getting delayed, because peace doesn't come from winning emotionally. Peace comes from releasing the need to keep proving something. Now, let me be clear. There's nothing wrong with processing what happened. Reflection is healthy. Learning is healthy. Awareness is healthy. But ego turns reflection into obsession, and obsession becomes emotional imprisonment. You start mentally arguing with someone who's not even in the room anymore, and it's draining. And most people don't even realize that they're doing it. So now here's the action item. The next time you catch yourself replaying the betrayal in your mind, stop and ask yourself, am I trying to heal right now, or am I trying to win? See, that question changes everything, because healing and winning are not the same thing. Winning is ego, healing is peace. And if you constantly need the other person to understand your value or regret losing you or validate your pain or admit they were wrong or come back to apologize, then emotionally they still control part of your peace. And guys, that is dangerous. It's dangerous to your mental health. The goal is not to win the breakup. The goal is to become free from it. And freedom starts the moment you stop putting your energy into emotional courtrooms that no longer matter. Here's the third point. The right people choose each other. One of the hardest things to accept after betrayal is realizing that the right person does not need to be convinced to stay aligned with you. The right people choose each other, especially when life gets difficult. Now, that doesn't mean relationships are always easy. I'm not trying to say that. They're not. Every relationship is going to experience different things like stress, pressure, misunderstandings, adversity, emotional stress, uncertainty. But healthy people lean into communication and alignment during hard seasons. They don't quietly start looking for exits. And this is where a lot of people stay emotionally stuck because they keep trying to convince themselves, well, maybe they really did love me. Maybe the circumstances were just too much. Maybe if things were different, maybe they'll eventually realize, maybe. But eventually you have to stop building fantasy futures around people who already revealed what they do and who they are under pressure. That's reality. And reality protects your peace. One of the deepest lessons I took from my situation was this. Don't marry the person you can have fun with. Marry the person you can struggle with. Now, I'm not saying marriage was even close to being on the table at that point, but you get the idea. Because fun, guys, is easy. Chemistry, attraction, vacations, romance are all easy. But adversity reveals whether two people are truly equipped to build a life together. And if someone cannot stay aligned with you through pressure, or uncertainty, or fear, or emotional discomfort, or adversity, there's no foundation. So here's the action item. Stop asking, how do I get them back? And start asking, did this person truly demonstrate the qualities required to build a peaceful future with me? Or a better way to say it, do they deserve my access? Do they deserve access to me? See, that question creates clarity really, really fast. Because some people are assigned to your life temporarily, not permanently. And not everybody deserves lifelong access to you simply because there was chemistry, love, attraction, or some sort of emotional attachment. Access to you must be earned. It's called self-respect. That's what creates sustainable peace, not temporary feelings. Point number 4, ego takes betrayal personally. This is where ego gets really, really loud, guys. Because after betrayal, rejection, and abandonment, the ego immediately starts attaching your worth, your self-worth, to what happened. You start asking questions like, what does this say about me? How did I miss this? Was I not enough? Did I get played? Did I waste my time? Why would they choose someone else over me? And if you stay in that mental space too long, your confidence starts bleeding into your identity, and that becomes dangerous because another person's actions do not define your worth. It reveals theirs. And this is where people either heal correctly or start building bitterness into their personality because ego wants to personalize everything, but mature healing requires perspective. Not every betrayal is proof you lacked value. Sometimes it's simply proof that the person lacked maturity, the timing lacked alignment, the relationship lacked foundation, or the other person lacked the emotional tools necessary to sustain something healthy with you. That's important. It's not always about you. Because if you internalize every betrayal as evidence that you are inadequate, you'll slowly destroy your own identity from the inside out. So here's the action item. Stop asking, what did this situation say about me? And start asking, what did this situation reveal to me? See, that question shifts you from insecurity into awareness. because pain can either harden you, it can weaken you, or it can sharpen you. And the people who grow the most from adversity are usually the ones who stop personalizing everything and start learning from it instead. That's emotional maturity. And that's how you keep betrayal from poisoning your identity. Point number 5, forgiveness does not mean reopening access. A lot of people struggle with forgiveness because they misunderstand what forgiveness actually is. They think forgiveness means pretending it didn't hurt, minimizing what happened, reconnecting, rebuilding trust, reopening access, or acting like everything is just okay. And that's not forgiveness. That is lack of boundaries. Forgiveness is not permission for someone to continue disrupting your peace. Forgiveness is releasing the person so you stop carrying it internally. That's different. And this is where ego can become dangerous again, because ego usually swings between two extremes, obsession and bitterness. Either you stay emotionally attached or you harden yourself so much that you stop trusting everyone. Neither one creates peace. And one of the biggest mistakes people make after betrayal is allowing pain to turn into identity. We talked about it earlier. You become cynical, emotionally unavailable, hyper-guarded, constantly testing people, always expecting disappointment. And guys, that is not strength. That is unresolved hurt wearing armor. A strong person is not emotionally numb. A strong person can feel betrayal very, very deeply without allowing it to poison who they become. So here's the action item. Forgive internally, but evaluate access honestly, because some people can be forgiven without being invited back into your life. And that is where your maturity comes into play. And look, if you need a practical way to start releasing resentment, here's a simple prayer that helped me during my deep dive through this. God, please replace the chaos and confusion in my mind with confidence, clarity, and creativity. Amen. Simple but powerful, because peace usually starts when you stop feeding emotional chaos internally. And look, remember this, boundaries are not bitterness, self-protection is not hate, and forgiveness does not require reconnection. Here's point number 6, stop feeding the rumination. One of the biggest ways ego survives after betrayal is through rumination. What that means is you're constantly thinking, constantly replaying, constantly emotionally revisiting. You replay the conversations, replay the ending, replay what you should have said, replay the disrespect, replay the betrayal. And the problem is your mind starts confusing emotional activity with emotional progress. But thinking about something constantly does not mean you're healing from it. Sometimes it just means you're emotionally stuck inside of it. And ego loves idle mental space, because the more space ego has, the louder it becomes. That's why people often spiral the hardest when they're laying in bed at night, when they're sitting alone too long, when you isolate yourself after disappointment. You start stalking social media, you're replaying memories, obsessing over details that no longer matter. Guys, that's not healing, that's self-inflicted emotional exhaustion. Now, let me be clear about something. You do need reflection. You do need processing time, and you do need to be emotionally honest with yourself. But eventually there comes a moment where healing requires movement, not mentally living inside the wound forever. So let's talk about the action item. Start redirecting your energy into reconstruction. Train hard. Build your mission, reconnect with good people, create, learn, lead, improve your health, deepen your faith, protect your mind. And what I'm talking about is being active and looking into your bright future, not dwelling on the present and the past. And guys, this isn't revenge, but it's reconstruction. Because the more purpose-driven your life becomes, the less emotional chaos controls your attention. And so this is why this is important. Distraction is never the goal. transformation is. You're not trying to avoid the pain. You're trying to build a life where the pain does not take control of your identity. That's where real healing comes in. And there's another important realization here. A huge part of healing is rebuilding confidence in your future. Because one of the reasons people stay emotionally attached for so long is they secretly believe the best part of their life was tied to that person that betrayed you. That there's nothing better ahead, no deeper alignment ahead, no greater peace ahead, no healthier future ahead. That mindset keeps people emotionally chained to the past. But healing accelerates when you start building genuine belief that your future can become greater than what you lost. That may be this experience destroyed your future. Maybe it directed it. Sorry, I didn't say that correctly. Maybe what did I say? Maybe this experience didn't destroy your future, but it simply redirected it. And look, that matters. Because when your vision for the future becomes stronger than your emotional attachment to the past, you finally start moving forward internally. And for some of you listening, this is the point where you're realizing something difficult. You know that what you should do, but emotionally you still struggle to do it consistently. Because this is exactly where identity enters the conversation. Most people try to heal through behavior alone, but behavior without identity is unstable, which is why point number 7 is the most important point of this entire episode. Action without identity always collapses. So now we arrive at the most important part of today. Because everything we talked about today sounds good intellectually. Stop replaying the betrayal. Stop feeding the ego. Stop reopening emotional courtrooms. Protect your peace. Focus on reconstruction. Forgive internally. Move forward. It all sounds great. But here's the reality. Action is hard when your identity around it is weak. And that's the part most people never talk about. Because trying to consistently take healthy action without the right identity is like trying to build a skyscraper on a cracked foundation. Eventually, everything collapses under pressure. That's why people know exactly what they should do and still don't do it consistently. They still obsess, stalk social media, reopen wounds, emotionally spiral, keep unhealthy attachments alive, chase closure, seek validation, stay mentally trapped. Not because they're stupid, because identity always wins. Your identity is going to determine your standards, your emotional patterns, your discipline, your boundaries, your reactions, your resilience, and your consistency. And if your identity is still wounded, or emotionally dependent, or externally validated, or fearful, or insecure, or even attached to being chosen, then ego will keep hijacking your behavior no matter how much advice you hear. So that's why healing requires reconstruction at the identity level. You don't just need new actions, you need new internal standard, a power identity, an identity that says, I do not chase people who abandon alignment. I do not beg for validation. I do not build my worth around someone else choosing me. I do not allow betrayal to poison my character. I do not let emotional pain destroy my discipline. I do not lose myself because someone else is misaligned. That's power. And once identity changes, the actions we talked about today feel impossible, or they stop feeling impossible, because now your behavior matches who you believe you are. And that's the key. Most people are trying to force behavior change while still carrying a wounded identity. That creates constant internal conflict. But when identity changes first, people start becoming natural. Discipline becomes natural, boundaries, clarity, and self-respect all become natural. So look, this is why I created Sisu Vita. For myself, in this case, not as motivation, as identity reconstruction. Because information alone rarely creates permanent change. Most people already know what they should do. The problem is their subconscious identity still resists the behavior. That's why they stay trapped in cycles. So Sisa Vita was designed to help remove the internal resistance and help rebuild identity from the inside out. Again, not temporary hype, and it's certainly not motivation. If you know me, you know it's not motivation. It's real identity transformation, because the identity changes when the